Yeah.
Anybody who wants to step up their game is a great place to be able to start off. But, now we talked about the Medivh a little bit. First off, we got to figure out where we're going. Then we'll figure out if the Medivh is going to be a problem as we take a look for Battleground number 2 here. Heroes Hearth claiming game number 1. Simplicity ends up going with first pick. And so game number 2, Heroes Hearth is going to take us to Volskaya Foundry.
Think they want that Medivh?
Probably.
Like, there's very little chance Medivh makes it past first pick.
Yeah, I would agree. And I don't think that's something that is going to change for some time, especially with some of the adjustments, or at least until the Arcane Explosion, if maybe that was to not be synergistic with the Force of Will, AoE Force of Will. But as long as that is the case, it is doing a lot of damage here for these players, for these teams. The biggest thing otherwise that I feel like what we can learn about Volskaya, especially Western versus Eastern, because keep in mind, we saw our first ever Korean Volskaya Foundry ever in competitive Heroes of the Storm over this past couple weeks, and it's the early game fight. That is something these teams have to be considering, have to be drafting around, making sure you don't lose those protectors, because, we call them protectors like they're defensive, but those boys are offensive as hell. They go in.
There's a new movie coming out. It kind of resembles it. We won't throw any plugs out there. But when robots start smashing, it's it. And that first one, we see a lot of teams. The main priority, you take out the front wall of the mid fort, you rotate up to the top lane, you take fort wall, you take well. That's a huge win because the second control point is at the top lane. And at that point, you've gained such a strong stance on that. So we'll see it. The early game team fight is definitely where it's at.
Yeah, and if you thought you were afraid of a Punisher, over the wall, what that does with the front wall when it's lost, I promise you, you are going to be terrified of these protectors. Those things are way more lethal. And even though they take 2 heroes, it seems like the trade-off, starting as, again, the very first objective, it is worth your commitment here. Ladies and gentlemen, Simplicity going to kick off the draft. Genji looks like it's something they're considering. But again, until we see it picked up, I'm going to go, where's the Medivh? Where is the Medivh in every single draft we have today?
There's another hero with M, I, and E, and
is
V.
It Maiev?
All in the name. And what was interesting is, with the Medivh pick, when we saw some of the EU games earlier, they were willing to let that through because they have the Medivh. Oh, you want to bring somebody in? We'll just port them right back out. And with the new Medivh being stronger in the early game portion, we might see that maybe let through here. Like, which do you want, Simplicity? Do you want Maiev or Medivh?
See, that's normally in one of these cases, you go, well, then how many, from a draft perspective, right? From an overarching draft perspective, you go, how many OPs do I consider there be? Because if the answer is 2, or at least if it's an even number that you can reasonably pick up within your 2, 3, because if it's an odd 2, there's 3, you let all of them go through, you get 1, I get 2, doesn't matter, right? As long as it doesn't hit 4 or 5, that's when it gets against you. But then you have to consider the trade-off of the objective power compared to that of the map. I would argue Volskaya, because of the early game skirmishing and how relevant that's going to be and how important those team fights are, I go, as long as the objective power accents team fighting, I commit to it. Medivh definitely is a hero that very much can do that, and so I feel like I would be putting a lot more consideration. But you can tell, Heroes Hearth, they're taking their sweet, sweet time. It's a tough conundrum here.
They're just trying to figure out what counters Lili the best.
Well, we'll see if we get ourselves a Lili. We didn't see the Malfurion ban traditional, or as tradition from game number 1. Medivh was taken away, but no instant lock on that Maiev. If not, what are we considering? Malfurion with the Tracer pickup later. Again, this is before the Tracer nerfs coming in. No, Maiev is the answer for Simplicity.
Well, now that Medivh isn't there, one of the heroes that we've seen probably most when it comes to the frontline hero has been the Johanna to counter that, in the sense that if you get tethered as Johanna, you're the most likely because you're on the front line. You have the Unstoppable with the Iron Skin. You walk right out of it. That's kind of been the go-to that we've seen so far. So we'll see if that does come into play here for Heroes Hearth, but maybe they have different things in mind. The Anubarak has kind of been another one that we had seen, but that's more of like the I stay in or I go out, and if you're using your burrow charge out, it's not exactly the way you want to be using it. So we'll see if the Johanna comes in, but Heroes Hearth, obviously, with their first 2 picks, let's see if they prioritize Kron's hero before the second ban.
Since we're bringing out the Johanna kind of trade-off into Maiev, another hero that I want to be keeping my eyes on for North America is Junkrat. Where does that priority come in? That was a pairing we saw very heavily. Dignitas has been running it for a hot minute. The Eastern world has definitely prioritized Johanna and Junkrat and some of the synergies there sooner than some of the rest. It's going to be Malfurion and Tyrael here for Heroes Hearth Esports. I would say, this is sticking to, again, some of that Western Clash, Eastern Clash meta. a lot of opportunity to move into the Tracer. Pretty much, I feel like almost kind of demands that. And more importantly, it's a lot of sustain around the early game fights.
Well, you mentioned Zuna wanting to try and be that all-star, be that carry role. Tracer is definitely available. Tracer does well skirmishing in open areas, which is what we have here on Volskaya. You see Malfurion on the backside, doesn't have that burst healing. Tyrael obviously can provide shielding, but you do have some ways to play around that. But Tracer Maiev, is that going to be too much in consideration there? Because with Maiev, I kind of wonder, is that Prismat? Is that Hosty? Is that Zuna? It likely won't be Hosty, but will that be Zuna? Will that be Prismat trying to work in this player with this new opportunity here? It's going to be difficult to see the synergy that you can potentially come up with when you start to mix in newer heroes plus a newer player.
That's a really good point that you bring up. It's one of those things that, you know, whenever they're playing with a sub and playing with a new member, like we see Simplicity playing with right now with Prismaticism, it's one of those, like, you can't really know. Only they can, right? Like, in terms of the comfortability of how much trust are they giving to Priz, how comfortable is Priz flexing outside of some of the heroes that we knew him for, because, you know, it's not like he's breaking out the same heroes he did on Roll 20, at least not yet. But we do see the Junkrat. Ends up getting picked in, you know, area I didn't expect it to here for Simplicity, but I have no qualms with it. Junkrat, the control he provides, he's pretty much, I would argue, one of the few macro characters that remain that doesn't get so crippled into a team fight that you go, you know, why'd we pick the Junkrat? And you're like, oh, it's for the minion control. He has a lot of utilities, but you always are going to be a problem when looking at the map and how functional, or how well he clears.
The amount of displacement that you could potentially have in the early game of a Garrosh toss into a concussion mine, maybe at or near a wall, especially when we look at the early control point. Maybe that's a thing that they can go with. Displacement, toss, concussion mine, Maiev, Umbral Cord. Like, let's just tether everybody, toss, and then, you know, wherever you end up, maybe we get somebody else beyond that. Who knows?
Looks like Tracer seems to be the hover after the Stukov ban from HeroesHearth. Not giving consideration towards a potential fear of the Uther, rather the Stukov over that. Interesting case, considering the Medivh ban out. Something maybe they don't want to deal with, the threat of, you know, the lockdown from Maiev and that Warden's Cage with the silence underneath. We've seen a couple of those work out really, really well at international play. And, you know, it's pretty terrifying. I just thought for, you know, with the Medivh being the ban out, to not put that emphasis because, you know, I forgot that the Western world has a little bit lower value on Uther.
Except for BBJ.
Except for BBJ, but he's got his Malfurion.
He's already got his
mouth.
With heroes in mind, HeroesHearth, Tychus comes to mind to deal with that front line.
Okay.
To be able to survive a lot in the back line. But is it just going to be Crowan on that, who's played it generally for this team? Or are we going to get more?
I really hope that it is the Tychus. On the note of that early game fight, right? Any kind of shielding and healing from the Tyrael Malfurion with him, mixed with, because his early game power spike sits at 4, whereas a lot of ranged assassins kind of are more dependent on those later tiers or even just raw scaling, it also provides a lot of immediate threat. The bigger they are, if you end up hitting a chunk onto anybody, that forces a tap, forces a heal, and that sometimes is the difference between Protector number 1 and 2. We still do see our Thrall, again, before the crashed lightning adjustments.
Do we get Alex Straza here is the question.
Oh.
It's something that K1 has played, and you look on the other side, Stukov, in terms of sustain, has been taken away. Uther doesn't sustain very well over long team fights. Rhaegar maybe post level 4 with his healing totem, because it's on a shorter cooldown than other totems in the game. But Alex Straza has been something he's been very proficient on in the early part of this year.
I will say, that scares me. Alex Straza, time sensitivity of her healing is so asking your opponent to give you something that at this level I always go, you know, Infernal Shrines, you can kind of see the thought process here and there. If there's another failsafe, I can very much understand it, but it is going to be
the
Rhaegar instead. It's just, I mean, seriously, think about it. I mean, Malfurion has the opportunity to just drop a root consistently into that choke, right? Not even questioning if he wants to go with, you know, healing reduction over that time frame. It's just so easy to be able to manipulate around that it oftentimes is not worth the trade-off. But we do see the Rhaegar end up being committed. The Blaze as well here for Simplicity. you know, a different draft in terms of what we saw at a part number 1 for North America, but considering, again, Eastern and Western Clash metas, it's a bit more in line with that line of thinking.
I like it a lot. You know, you and I had an opportunity to talk to Wubby, and we're like, look, why aren't you picking assassins, right? Why aren't you picking the melee assassins? He'll occasionally flex over as needed, but it's like when you have the self-sustain and the amount of utility that you have from the warrior on the front line, and I think that's going to be like a shift that we see, and a lot of teams have adapted, is use that melee assassin when necessary, when applicable, instead of trying to run it every game. And you can see a lot of success that they have by allowing the playmakers on the team to make the plays and only being that part-time playmaker as needed. Be the setup man, be the assist guy.
Hanzo is the last selected here for Crowan and HeroesHearth. Provides a lot of poke, really well around the team fight, again, into the earlier stages. I will say, the only parts about this that I do have some, you know, a little bit of fear, I guess, on the side of HeroesHearth over that first skirmish is going with the Thrall Malthael. Just because Thrall isn't weak in the early game, I don't want to say, because he is pretty effective, but he doesn't have the same packing of the punch that we know at the later stages. Malthael, again, same problem. Doesn't necessarily look at as a weak hero in the early game, but because he scales with percentage of health, which scales through levels, which again comes through time, it's not like his numbers are going to be any different than, again, if you had the Tormented Souls opportunity. It's very dependent on making sure you hit your E. It just goes for how good the first 2 picks were into focusing on the fight. I'm surprised at how difficult I look at that skirmish now for them and their composition.
It's definitely later in the game that we'll probably see, maybe a little different build in terms of the Hanzo build coming out. Maybe not the scatter arrow, maybe look towards blowing up that front line a little bit differently, especially with the Garrosh on the other side, get some armor reduction. We'll see how that plays out, but as you said, the early game team fight, if you lose that, if you lose the first protector, as we alluded to already, it doesn't take much to snowball a lead in the early part of the game, so we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, we are ready to figure out, you know, who's not only going to be getting that first protector, but who's just going to be winning here for Volskaya, as we've got game 2 between Simplicity and HeroesHearth and Jayhow. The fight is going to matter. But beyond that point, what are some of the things that we can expect from these teams to be focusing, you know, kind of stop the bleeding if maybe for some reason they fail to achieve that Punisher?
Well, it was interesting because you and I, we were prepping some notes and stuff. We were talking about different things. Where do we see Simplicity lie? Are they more of a team fighting team? Are they more of a macro team? Are they more of a blend? Where are they at? They're definitely a team fighting team. But when I go back to the earlier part of this year, this was one of the maps where when they got a pick or two, I remember distinctly they defended their top left keep area, and then they were able to make snap decisions, snap judgments in terms on how do we take advantage of this battleground. And this is something that I think that if it does fall behind a little bit for Simplicity, they understand this battleground maybe better in terms of what they need to do than others, so that could be their fallback option if things don't go right.
And it should be noted, you know, at least that first game, even though the win not falling on the side of Simplicity, they were in pretty good control of the majority of that game, winning the first 2 Immortals. Not only did they win the Immortals, but for the most part, other than, again, that kind of pick that happened on Nizuna in that 15-16 awkward moment, things were looking good. Arthlon maybe caught out on top, able to keep himself alive. Crowan and BBJ, the support squad, coming in. We'll threaten the members of Simplicity back here, but for now it is going to be kind of slow and steady transitions as the 1-4 unfolds.
I think Arthlon was our first person in North America to bust out Thrall, if I'm not mistaken.
Are we talking HGC North America 2018?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, hey, you know, I know some Heroes history. I don't know if he was that guy.
New Thrall.
He's going to be the one, you know, showing possibly, I don't want to say the last week, but let's be real here. The nerfs on to Thrall were significant enough that his impact and relevance is drastically going to drop.
I went to bed crying last night.
Is that it?
Yeah.
You just cried just purely because of Thrall nerfs?
Yeah.
I mean, I crawl because of Medivh buffs and changes. Not really. I just cry at Medivh in general. But I can understand the feel, an attachment to a hero that much.
I've been saying Crash Lightning's been good for a while. That 20% range buff is nice, but he's been good for a while. He just, you know, he woke up. The rest of the world woke up. Here we are, our last week of OP Thrall.
Our last week of Thrall having at least temporary relevance here in the meta. Simplicity picks up their camp. It's going to be mirrored and matched by HeroesHearth and their camp down below, getting the split pressure. If anything, you could argue maybe Simplicity gains an upper hand purely because they have a, I don't want to say an advantageous 1-versus-1 because that's not true with the Malthael Blaze trade-off, but Blaze does pretty good on the macro sense, has the pressure on an off lane away from the objective, but that's only going to matter if we get our first protector up here. Look at these teams looking to defend off this top camp. As HeroesHearth, they actually completed theirs but didn't lock it in. Going to time theirs a bit better.
There's the tether in. Ishbu able to use that Eldruins out. And, you know, there's a little bit of a different story that we see on Volskaya. We saw the turrets that were picked up first, those bottom camps on either side. A lot of people like to collect those, and then because the cooldown timers, when it comes to the second protector, the second control point, is doubling up on those, having that control, because when one is good, but two is better. And I think a lot of teams will try and play around that. We'll see if either team uses it during this early skirmish, depending on how it plays out. We can see Maiev continuing to be a factor there, as that is obviously Zuna, not Prismat.
But HeroesHearth did get that camp pressuring top. The Hanzo's going to clear and prep that to be a problem earlier than Simplicity would like. That's going to force Blaze or Junkrat to be the one to back out and clear, and you can't risk Junkrat's damage around this first fight. Malthael passive going to drop on a King Caffeine, setting him now 60% HP. Junkrat is going to be the man making the rotation towards that top camp. This is a lot of free percentage over to HeroesHearth, and this is that, you know, what we were talking about all of the draft, the focus onto this. Another thing to keep in mind is the Malthael Blaze matchup in the 1v1 on bottom. The reason we see that there is because the conveyor belt transition towards mid is so much faster, so it is relevant who wins this 1v1 versus normally we think of the other side of the map, right? It's very much bottom over the first objective of Volskaya.
The one thing I think will be interesting is the position of HeroesHearth. And I think Ishbu's really the only one that can move forward just a bit, because if you can get Maiev with Zuna on there to lock somebody in and pull them a little bit and then get the Garrosh throw over towards those towers, it's incredibly difficult to be that aggressive. You could see they're trying to find some synergy in that as they move forward, but that's going to be the thing for HeroesHearth is positioning. And right now, they've pretty much had to hit the reset button because they got forced off here by Simplicity moving forward as King Caffeine continues to hold point.
But they did win the bottom lane, and that's going to allow McIntyre to kind of make the rotation here towards middle. So he's going to posture up with Ishbu. Nice Eldruin's follow-up. Jet Propulsion going to land onto McIntyre. Damage on the King Caffeine, ridding of that armor. Falling very, very low. Uses Indomitable. Zuna actually wearing the arrow. Keeps him alive. Use the Vault. Turret drop 63 to 63 when looking at the percentage on this. But HeroesHearth now going to claim it back for themselves.
Ooh.
McIntyre in the 1v1.
Oh, and he throws down the spray.
Gotta love it. It's a roll 20 spray. Yeah, it's even juicier.
If you don't know, Prismat used to be on roll 20, and I think McIntyre recognized that coming in. Dude, look, there's so much that goes on in a game, but if there's that one mental aspect that you did not expect, I mean, dude, he's looking at that spray. Prismat's an emotional dude. He's trying to mess with him.
Yeah, the biggest thing is, man, you don't want to... Ooh,
got
man,
him.
Arthalon catching out Hosty there. Nice Feral Spirit, giving him all 3 slaps there with the Dewhammer. Mid-fort front wall, you talked about it. It's already down. Next thing in the scope of HeroesHearth, having both Tyrael and Hanzo, it's going to be that top fort front wall. They've already hit the level spike advantage we were so concerned about as well. This is going to be extremely advantageous next couple of minutes for HeroesHearth. They can paint this map red, and at this point, it's more than just their team colors. It might be the blood of Simplicity, because this is a huge advantage in the earlier stages. But they're actually not committing enough transition towards this top fort to the point where they might get it a little bit slow. This, to me, shows they have a lot of intent with the 13 talent tier advantage in the later stages of this game. One of those, I think, yet to be determined, especially on Volskaya, whether or not that trade-off is worth.
Oh. Got that big old fist locked down from the Protector, and Hosty had to put that concussion mine down. Now with the threat of 10 here, Dread, they got enough soak in the other lanes. They're level 10. They've already prepped this lane. They're dominating this top lane, preparing for the next control point. With level 10, they've still got another 30, 45 seconds before Simplicity can answer with their heroics.
Got to keep our eyes on, you know, what do they do over those next few minutes? Because much like I feel like Simplicity was the one answering the tough questions, now HeroesHearth is going to be with it. It's a bit more clear of an advantage than that 13-12 of Limbo of Battlefield of Eternity in game number 1. HeroesHearth back out, look to pick themselves up the little boss here.
Dread, I know you're a big fan of Sundering, but we're looking at 4 melee on the side of Simplicity and a lot of control maybe around that Maiev, the Blaze, the Rhaegar, and the Garrosh. Is that going to be enough maybe with the likes of Malthael, with the Tormented Souls, the likes of potentially the Holy Ground, things like that? Hold on a second.
Hold up here, initiation from Zuna, hits a 2-man tether, Warden Cage goes down, but the Tranquility is there. Thrall on the front line, drops the Earthquake with that Sanctification. Bunker is here to keep Simplicity alive. You see them go in, go out. Zuna falling very low. There's the Dragon Arrow with the Ancestral from K1 Pro. So clutch, keeps him up. You see the Vault used from Zuna, but it's not enough to dodge that damage from the Last Rites. 2 kills here for HeroesHearth, but it comes at the cost of the Thrall.
Scratch that Tormented Souls, because Last Rites was in play, and that did obtain that kill there. Heroes Hearth, they went for the heavy invade. They end up with a 2-for-1 trade, so not all is lost. But I think they probably maybe expected a little bit differently there, but the resistance came from Simplicity, just didn't work out on the side of Simplicity.
You know, you asked about, I'm still sorry, thinking about the Earthquake and some of the trade-offs within this, you know, and some of the decision-making on the heroics picked up for Heroes Hearth. I will say that, you know, Earthquake very much has a place. Like, I know I meme about Sundering, but it's mainly just because I love how common it is in the Eastern world compared to the Western, and I've got to be that guy who's like, why don't we see any of the Sundering? But in this case, it does make a lot of sense. It's going to be very, very crippling, but it does put a lot more pressure onto Tyrael specifically, I feel like, in this composition. Yes, the Tranquility is there to kind of stop the bleeding of the team fight when the Warden Cage goes down on the side of Simplicity, but it's going to make it to where Tyrael needs to be very, very impactful with the Sanctifications. Last fight, Ishbu was able to get that onto Arths, keep him alive with that, and as long as that continues, this is going to be great. But let's say that suffers. You don't have any counter momentum whatsoever to that Warden's Cage without having the Sundering, or I would say Tormented Souls. But we see Last Rites picked up for the Garrosh trade-off, right? That was one of those, I didn't get to choose my heroic Malthael picks, so it's not really up to him as much as I would say it is that Thrall. But right now, you know, Arthlon and friends, they're making it look good.
A little bit of a self-cleanse there from Malthael as he saw the concussion mine, making sure that he didn't get knocked back. His team was around, but didn't want to risk that. See if that holds off. Little update on the stacks. Crash Lightning only at 12. Once you hit 20, it's much easier to stack because they'll no longer randomly, potentially, jump to a minion. Ishbu dodging a little bit of danger there from Kaf and Hosty. But we do have our control point available. Simplicity about a half level away from 13, so Heroes Hearth should get a jump start on this.
How much of a jump start is the real question here? Blaze is still showing himself on bottom. It's about, what, 2 full waves until they end up getting the 13s. They have that available through mid and top. So the fact that we see anybody down to bottom is very much showing that, you know, they're going to be slow in rotation. Even Malthael looking to get the cutoff in the flank. He'll scout out the movement here of Simplicity. Looks like it's going to be, I mean, a minimum, you know, there might be a full forfeit at this point. Zuna questioning if he wants to make the transition.
Well, they're going to contest.
All right.
Does go to overtime. Remember, you can sit on 99%, but if the enemy team comes in, it will stay on 99%. I think that's what they're going for.
Yeah, they're going to be going for that play, but it also, keep in mind, that is a very higher risk situation compared to the trade-off of losing somebody in a fight when it's at 50%. The death timer difference between those two and the threshold to be able to get the objective hold up here. Garrosh gets the taunt. The knockback is there. Tether not going to get the proc yet, but Tyrael ends up getting out there with the Eldruin Sanctification, or excuse me, not Sanctification, but Tranquility is going to stack up and be used. That's a cooldown here. Simplicity is going to wait out and then all in initiate beyond. Or just wait out and not take the risk or trade off there. I guess with Sanctification and Earthquake, it's enough to deter them away completely.
You know, Dread, what I'm afraid of by doing that, though, by not contesting this is basically a free fort mid.
Yes.
And then once that fort goes down, you get very close to 16, and Prismat just barely getting out alive. But once this fort goes down, although they don't have the minions here, I'm actually a little bit surprised, because if they get mid fort and then bottom fort wall, that's 16, and you're now establishing a 2-level lead and dominance over the battleground.
Yeah, with 16 Talontier advantage, and at that point, it's going to be, you know, we're no longer considering about forts here. It's going to be keeps are the name of the game for HeroesHearth Esports. Here it is, 15 3/4.
All they got to do is go down bot lane, and it'll be the same establishment that you saw from the first Protector, is that you go to the bot lane, you try and work your way through the bottom fort wall, and then you take the well.
Yep.
And then when you look at the third control point being bottom, you're now taking away every defensive, you know, favor that you can get if you're on the side of Simplicity, thus raising the difficulty level for Simplicity to get back in this game.
It's one of those situations where we see teams on like maps like, you know, Infernal Shrines, where you prep the front wall, prep the fort before you end up getting the objective. It's pretty much been rinse and repeat thought process there for HeroesHearth. They do have Malthael displaying himself on top, even with the 16 advantage. 1 second away from losing that Punisher, and Zuna's trying to capitalize. Gets the tether onto 2. Crow and eats the Sanctification, keeps himself alive. A lot of damage traded onto Zuna. Last scattering arrow maybe missing the mark a little bit, but not going to cost HeroesHearth anything. I'll be honest, that's one of those moments where I genuinely thought Simplicity was able, you know, realistically to get the punishment, especially around that bottom siege, and kind of HeroesHearth maybe biting off more than they can chew, but not pulling the trigger at least fast enough or getting the skirmish they would desire within a reasonable time frame. And now it's going to cost them a lot more on this map because of that advantage you talked about before. 16 and so many forts down. It really is, the world is HeroesHearth's until Simplicity finds themselves that talent here.
I want you, as we scroll through these heroes on the side of Heroes Hearth, the timing on the first turret camp on the bottom right.
Yeah.
Okay, it's cycled a couple times. We now have 3 turrets because McIntyre's holding one, BBJ is holding one now. Crowan, he's going to hold one. They all have turrets, and we know about those conveyor belts on the bottom. You got 3 turrets somewhere in that vicinity, and you're cycling around there. That's not fun. I don't know. One turret, you're like, man, that doesn't feel good. This isn't very fun to play into. But when there's 3 turrets, that's like another hero there on your side. That is going to be tough for Simplicity. And if Heroes Hearth uses those appropriately, they've been building for this moment. That is another thing in their favor that they can really capitalize on.
And you see Simplicity, their decision-making. Hold on, if they catch McIntyre, this is going to be a huge win. They bring out the Riptire even for it. He's going to keep himself alive a little bit here, but without a Tormented Soul all in play, not able to buy enough time. Vault used from Zuna.
He dodged the last rights.
Yep, able to dodge that last rights. You know, it's still sitting at a 9-second cooldown in this patch.
Wow.
And that allows a 2-for-1 trade. This is Simplicity finding a way to get themselves back into this game just by catching out one person there on the top half of the map. And this is, again, kind of referring towards that pause button, that slow moment of hesitation on Heroes Hearth. I thought we'd see Simplicity punish them. They weren't able to do so with that Protector, but very much able to do so in this kind of downtime. And I would argue this is a lot of what, where the macro game has gone is just, if you try to play the macro game, it's not gained enough impact most of the time because the objectives happen so fast, the fights happen so fast, that realistically, other than, if you go off for a side laner, the odds of you getting killed in a gank is increased drastically compared to the past. Think about last game. Simplicity pulls ahead, winning a majority of it until caught out in a specific area. You see those staggered deaths. Side lane soaking right now, post 13, is oftentimes not worth the trade-off.
Simplicity just put themselves back in this game in a very decisive way. Now they're holding on to 2 turrets. They have that healing pulse that's been obtained from the camp up at the top. And they're pretty much, they're uneven talent tiers and they're barely down in terms of experience. Obviously they can't wait forever, but their opportunities to come back and get to 20 are much greater than Heroes Hearth. However, Heroes Hearth does have a wall and a well to fall back to in this bottom lane as the control point's underway.
Couple of percentage picked up here for Simplicity. When do we see the turret show laid down by Heroes Hearth is the question. That conveyor belt kind of zooming around. Flip from Cap onto Ishbu. Not going to quite hit the mark there. McIntyre moves up. Zuna looking to get that tether. Self-cleanse. It's going to allow McIntyre to walk away.
Zuno's getting the reset on his fan of knives as he's gone in there and put quite a bit of damage out. King Caffeine eating a lot as well. Ancestral lands. Last rights, I think, might have missed the mark there. Yeah,
really good job as well with baiting the Sanctification opportunity. If they want to get the reinitiation, Simplicity going to go in. Ishbu eats a Dragon Arrow. A little bit of damage. McIntyre trying to get the poke alive. They end up getting the first kill there onto Maiev, unable to make it out. K1 Pro trying to get the kite, but look at McIntyre dive in the back lane by himself. King Caffeine doing the same, but maybe not sharing the same fate as Mac is just ripping apart this HP with that Feral Spirit. That is going to be 5-4-0. Heroes Hearth take no time here as they move on to a keep.
Yeah, they're going to sidewall this, get through, get directly onto the keep with death timers in this composition, Dread. There's potential they just walk right up to core. I mean, this is 30, 40 seconds left of anybody coming back.
I will tell you, as a guy who's gotten to play conveniently enough with Arth1, I will say that he's very good at being, no, just end. This game is not going to last any longer. He very much thoroughly understands sidewall keep. This game is GG in no re. Simplicity unable to hold their own here on Volskaya Foundry. And that is now a 2-0 lead over to Heroes Hearth Esports. The team that kind of, went to the Western Clash for North America. We all knew North America was bigger, better, and brighter than maybe we were of past. But everybody wondered, what does that mean for the 4th seed? We have yet to see North America 4th seed perform internationally, and they brought it. The biggest thing, though, is they are bringing it back here to NA.
They're bringing it back here to NA in a big way. And although they've had some adversity in the first 2 games from Simplicity, they've done it in their own style. And a lot of it has been around Crowan, but it's more about how can you supplement around that, whether it was the Medivh Lili in game 1 or whether it was a little bit of a change up here. Outside of that 1-2 picks that we had in the top lane, it was a pretty clean game for Heroes Hearth. I think if they clean up that mistake, losing 1 hero there, not the worst, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that Ishbu kind of compounded the issue a little bit, they brought it back, still had a lot in their favor. But that did surprise me a little bit, seeing Ishbu kind of double up on there. They cleaned that up, Drad, and this is a pretty smooth game for them.
Yeah, I very much, I agree with you. But I wanted, looking at the other side, by no means is that too big of a setback, I feel like, for Simplicity, especially when looking at game one. They came out very, kind of clean and concise on the same page, and things worked out great. So, that is something we're going to be keeping our eyes on here. But we're going to go to a quick commercial break. And here, when we get back, we have more HGC North America, so stick with us.